Growing up in Australia, I hated sunscreen. It was thick, sticky, greasy, and anytime I wanted to go outside, I had to smear it on my face. And then when I moved to Japan, I discovered Asian skincare and very quickly realized that actually I didn't hate all sunscreen. I just hated Australian sunscreen. But anytime I'd recommend it to someone, I kept hearing that Asian sunscreen isn't strong enough for the Australian sun. But that never made any sense to me because they're the same SPF value. So I set out to find the truth about Japanese and Australian sunscreen, and it led me down a year-long rabbit hole filled with research, interviewing, and testing, and I discovered some things that will honestly shock you. All to answer the question, can Japanese sunscreen stand up against the Australian sun? Let's get started.
If you're coming to Australia,
listen to what they say and wear your sunscreen.
Your family needs protection against the harsh Australian sun.
Everything's peeling, my chest is peeling.
Every 6 hours, somebody dies of melanoma.
Do not use the sunscreen you've got from home.
Oh my gosh.
Australian SPFs are considered the gold standard.
They all look pretty bad.
Everyone's always in my comments saying Japanese and Korean sunscreens are way more elite.
Not strong enough for the Australian sun.
Now, going into this video, I thought it'd be fairly straightforward and easy to explain, but in just my first day of research, I was already diving headfirst into Japanese cosmetic regulations and research papers, so I really couldn't have been more wrong. So let's start at the beginning. How does sunscreen even work? So generally speaking, most sunscreens are made up of two major components. We have active ingredients, the things that actually protect you from the sun, and then we've got inactive ingredients or excipients, and these are the things that make the sunscreen feel the way that it feels. Different combinations of the two will give each sunscreen its own unique feel, smell, or efficacy. And then within the active ingredients themselves, there is two other categories. We have mineral or physical sunscreens and chemical. And I know what you're thinking, and no, chemical doesn't just mean it's full of toxins. The word chemical definitely has a lot of negative connotations, which is why a lot of brands and professionals like to use the term inorganic and organic, but for the sake of simplicity and what you probably already know, I'm just gonna go with the former. So what's the difference between chemical and mineral sunscreen, and which is stronger? Because if you look online, it seems like everyone thinks that mineral sunscreen is better because it acts as a physical blocker.
Mineral sunscreen actually reflects the rays,
And it's like you have a shield on your skin.
Cannot penetrate your skin.
There's zero absorption.
Physical barrier on the skin.
And they bounce off.
But actually, this is almost entirely incorrect. Chemical sunscreens work by absorbing the UV rays and converting them into heat. And mineral sunscreens actually work almost exactly the same way because studies have shown that reflection only makes up about 4 to 5% of the protection on the label. So the idea that physical sunscreens are just inherently stronger or better than chemical sunscreens is just completely incorrect. Mineral sunscreens are generally better for people with sensitive skin. However, they're usually a lot thicker and they always leave some kind of a white cast. So it's definitely not a good option for everyone.
if you are black and love yourself, don't buy this.
So when people say that Australian sunscreen is stronger than Japanese sunscreen, what does that actually mean? Most of the time, I think people are talking about SPF, but there's still a lot of misinformation about what that even is. SPF stands for sun protection factor, and the numbers just mean how much longer it took someone to burn while wearing that sunscreen when it was tested in a lab. So if it normally takes them 10 minutes to burn, using SPF 30, it should take them 300 minutes to burn. And no, I know exactly what you're gonna say. Well then, Hannah, why do I need to keep reapplying it? Sunscreen doesn't offer a complete uniform protection because different filters offer protection from different portions of the UV spectrum. So each sunscreen will look slightly different in the way that it protects you from UVA and UVB. And also, it is not a block, but a screen, so some sun will still be able to get through it. Also, this is with absolutely perfect application of the sunscreen, which historically, we're not very good at. There are studies that show we apply way less sunscreen than necessary, and also studies that show that we stay out in the sun for longer when we're wearing a higher SPF. This is a major reason why SPF labeling in Australia used to be capped at 30, but now it's capped at 50 plus.
My concern is that people will be misled by the number into thinking that they're using a much more effective product. And if they want to achieve better efficacy, they need to do it by applying it more effectively.
And to top it all off, we're showering, towel drying, blowing our nose, wearing clothes, and all of that is rubbing off our sunscreen slowly over time. Also, when you don't wear enough sunscreen, you're not getting the SPF that's written on the label.
If you have way too little, your skin is kind of bumpy, so if you're smoothing on the sunscreen, more of it will gather in like the valleys if you don't have too much, and the hills will be all exposed. You'll get areas where you'll have way too much sun exposure, and that could be where you start your melanoma, for example.
This is Dr. Michelle Wong. She has a chemistry PhD and she's a qualified cosmetic chemist, but she's most commonly known as Lab Muffin Beauty Science on YouTube.
So usually the recommendation for most people is 1/4 teaspoon for your face.
Oh no. Oh no!
But that was based off some EU average for men. So a lot of people have different size faces.
You know, I'm not a sort of head to toe slather of sunscreen, but I like to put some kind of on my nose and the area where the sun really hits.
Stop it.
If you have makeup that has SPF 15 in it, would that be enough?
No, because SPF 15 is low and you don't apply enough makeup, so you're probably applying like, I don't know, 1/10 of the amount. You're gonna get 1.5 SPF.
Oh my gosh. So if brands are trying to make their sunscreens nicer to wear, then why is Australian sunscreen so not nice to wear? Well, the first reason is, of course, regulations. Australia has by far the highest occurrence of skin cancer in the world and spends on average $1 billion annually on skin cancer treatments alone. So because of this, Australia takes sun safety very seriously. I think nearly all Australian kids remember the phrase, "No hat, no play," which basically meant if you didn't have a hat on, then you didn't get to play outside in the sun. And there's free sunscreen sometimes just in like public places provided by the government. They showed these absolute horror movie commercials on national television any time of the day, doesn't matter. Truly horrific stuff.
There's nothing healthy about a tan.
So of course, naturally, they also regulate the hell out of sunscreen. Sunscreen in Australia is listed as a therapeutic good, which is on the same level as like a pharmaceutical, and every sunscreen has to be regulated by the Therapeutic Goods Association, or the TGA, which is kind of like the FDA in Australia.
The sunscreens have to be manufactured in a TGA approved facility. So that is usually the biggest barrier, from what I've heard, to sunscreens being launched in Australia.
Companies have to spend a fortune to get their products tested for sale in Australia. So really only big companies with a guaranteed return can even afford to start this process. So on the one hand, it's great because it means we can trust every sunscreen to do its job, and it also makes companies legally liable for their products. But on the other hand, it limits the range of formulas that brands can come up with, and it slows down the rate that they can try new things. In Japan, on the other hand, skin cancer is very rare, so sunscreens are only listed as cosmetics. And while they are regulated by the Japan Cosmetic Industry Association, the JCIA, testing doesn't take as long. So as a result, they're able to trial, test, and formulate products a lot faster than Australia can. Another major reason for why they're so different, I think, has a lot to do with culture and habits. Australians love swimming and the outdoors and the beach and barbecues, and we want to do it in shorts and a singlet. And Japanese people don't.
The thicker and heavier a sunscreen is, generally the more water resistant it's going to be, because one of the things that makes sunscreens feel light is water. So if you have something that stays like not dissolving in water, it's probably going to be quite oil based. So if you try out water resistant sunscreens, they're generally going to be oilier, they're going to have like more polymers in them to keep that film like intact, and they're going to feel a lot more like a barrier, like an unbreathable layer, compared to like a really lightweight, non-water resistant sunscreen that is only meant to be used like walking to the office.
Because skin cancer is pretty rare in Japan, it seems like most people use sunscreen to avoid aging and sunspots. Companies respond to that by creating sunscreen that has to be light enough to go underneath makeup, or no one is gonna buy it.
Japanese like sunscreen makers know that Japanese people aren't gonna sweat that much in their sunscreen, so they can make them a lot more lightweight, whereas Australian manufacturers are like, we don't want to get a whole bunch of like angry emails about how people got burnt while they were swimming wearing our sunscreen, so we better like make them more waterproof. And turns out it's more heavy, but you know, we prefer that than all these angry people.
So it's this kind of like chicken or the egg situation. Like, we don't want to wear sunscreen daily because it's thick and gross, so then we only wear it when we're going outside doing sports and all of that. And then sunscreen companies are like, oh no, we need to make it strong and resilient and thick and gross, and we're like, I don't want to wear that because that's thick and gross. And then this vicious cycle continues. Fortunately, I do think that the trend of wearing sunscreen daily is on the rise recently, so Australian companies are now finally starting to make some much nicer, lighter sunscreens. Thank goodness. I've got a bunch of recommendations of both my favorite Japanese and Australian sunscreens at the end of the video. Stay tuned for that. But deliberate sun exposure isn't the only one that we should worry about. About 10 years ago, a photo went viral online of this elderly man who had some really obvious premature aging on only one side of his face. It might not seem too remarkable at first until you find out that he was a truck driver in the US for 28 years, and he would always sit on the driver's side of the truck, which is the left side.
Glass itself, it's really good at blocking out UVB, but not UVA. If you're in the middle of the field, about 40% of the UV you're getting is directly from the sun hitting you, and 60% is from the sky. This is super rough because it depends on so many things, but you're actually usually getting more UV from the sky than from the sun. But if you're inside a house, then like only that much of the sky maximum is getting to you. The closer you get to the window, the bigger the sort of like window is relative to you. Now inside a car, that's pretty bad because you've got like sky everywhere. The sun is moving, or you're moving relative to the sun. So like sun is shining on you and not. So I would definitely wear sunscreen inside a car.
In fact, one study done in Switzerland found that 80% of our annual UV exposure comes from indirect diffused sunlight, which is sunscreen that's coming through clouds, reflected from the ground, or coming in through a window. And ever since I saw that photo, I have worn sunscreen every single day since I was 21. And guys, let me tell you, I thought I discovered the elixir of life. I was like, I'm gonna look 30 when I'm 50, and I'm here to tell you that it's a lie. You still age, unfortunately. Nothing can stop the hands of time. Sunlight is made up of UVB and UVA rays. UVB is the one that damages the top layer of your skin. It makes you burn immediately and then tan later on. It causes the most amount of skin cancers, and it can cause some premature aging. UVA, however, goes deeper into your skin. It causes some skin cancers, and it causes the most amount of premature aging. So tanning beds, it's mostly UVA rays, so it's essentially like an aging machine. Like you walk in there, you get old, and then you walk out and you pay like $100 for it. What are we doing? To get a sunscreen that protects you from both UVB and UVA, in Australia that's just called broad protection, but in Japan and Korea they've got a different system, and that's what all of the PA++++++s mean. So 1+ meaning sun protection and 4+ meaning a lot of protection. I have this like specific memory of like my first time in Japan. I met this girl and she was like, oh my God, don't use any Japanese sunscreens that have the plus signs on it, because that means your skin's gonna get whiter because it has bleach in it. The insane things that people say when they've been in Japan for like a year. Also, I just want to rant for a quick second. Asian skincares cannot make your skin any whiter than it already is. Whitening doesn't mean it makes your skin white. It actually just means brightening. So it might tackle hyperpigmentation like in a vitamin C serum, or it might protect your skin from getting any darker, or it might have like a white cast, like a white makeup in it. But it cannot make your skin any whiter than it actually is, and there's actually a statement about this on a Japanese government website calling it out as bullshit. If I hear one person in the comments saying like, oh, I can't use Japanese sunscreen because it's gonna bleach my skin.
Right to jail, right away.
Okay, so what's the deal with Reef Safe? So this is one of those topics that I feel like requires its own entire video, which luckily Lab Muffin Beauty Science, she's made a video just about this topic, but in a nutshell, it's mostly BS. The test that concluded that some sunscreens are harmful to coral reefs was very unreliable and rushed out like crazy, and there's been a lot of tests done recently that have disproven it entirely, regardless of the fact that some countries still ban it. So in a nutshell, it's not really something that we should be worrying about, but if you do really want to protect coral reef and wildlife, then first things first, you should stop eating seafood. But yeah, anyway, that's a whole nother video. Please go and check out Dr. Michelle's video about it on YouTube. And now, ladies and gentlemen, if there are still gentlemen left watching at this point in the video, the sunscreen test. So a lot of people have done SPF tests online, and there are two main things that annoy me about them. Number one, a lot of them are stealth advertising and are completely 100% fake.
Oh my God, what is that? Oh my God! What is that?
And number two, the amount is usually never measured out, and as we now know, if you're applying too much sunscreen or not enough sunscreen, you're not getting the SPF that's stated on the label. Or if they are measured out, there's just way too much for the sample size, and it bunches up around the sides, and that causes inaccuracies as well. So I thought, big brain move, I'll just do it properly. How hard can it be? I wanted to test a wide variety of different kinds of sunscreens. So from Japan, I brought over to Australia some mineral sunscreens, some chemical, some cheap, some expensive, but hopefully all ones that you've heard of. On my left leg, I used entirely Japanese products, and on my right leg is all Australian products. So in a lab, they test by using 2 milligrams of sunscreen per square centimeter of skin. What I didn't realize is that a milligram isn't 0.1 grams, it's actually 0.001 grams, and I quickly realized that the lighter a weight is, the more inaccurate the results get without a really proper, expensive laboratory scales. So in the end, I used a section of skin that was 5 by 10 centimeters, which meant I could measure out 100 milligrams of sunscreen instead, and I used the plastic wrap to smear it onto my skin. To standardize the application in a lab, they actually have a machine that rubs it in for them, and it's called the Spreadmaster. They spread the sunscreen by swiping back and forth, up and down, and then around in a circle. I also left a panel on each leg empty as a control. When they do this test in a lab, they shine a circle-shaped UV lamp onto the skin until there's a slight reddening. Once someone can clearly see a defined circle on the skin, they'll stop the timer. They then do the same thing, but with sunscreen on it, and then time how long it takes for the same result. They'll test between 10 to 20 people and then average out the results, which gives them an SPF value. I did my very best to make sure all the sunscreens were evenly measured out, which is harder than you might think, but I'm like 90% confident that they were. And now we wait. So I have arbitrarily decided that 2 hours and 15 minutes is the limit, mainly just because I'm just getting way too hot and I can feel my legs burning for sure. And then it was time for the results. Whoa! Whoa! Oh my gosh. That's pretty crazy. It's very clear looking, even looking between the two controls. This side, the left leg, is more burnt than the right leg at this point. And they're clearly way more burnt on the left side, which gives me the impression that the sun was mostly on the left side for the experiment. I mean, to be honest, they all look very, very good. All of them are 100% better than nothing. So as we can see, based on these results, there really isn't a huge difference between the Australian sunscreens and the Japanese sunscreens, or even really between different brands. I noticed that the Japanese leg was like a teeny tiny bit darker than the Australian leg, but like I said earlier, I think that's just because it was facing the sun a little bit more directly than the Australian leg. Overall, it's kind of difficult to really tell because my legs are already different colors. I don't know, if I had to pick one brand that did the absolute best out of all of them, it would probably be this one, which was a Neutrogena spray sunscreen. Interesting. Overall, I feel like all of the sunscreens performed as stated on the label. Some potential problems I saw with my testing methods were the direction of the sun, obviously, the scales not being super accurate, and the sunlight wasn't consistent throughout. But all things considered, guys, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was like, yep, it's confirmed. I'm actually just a really smart person and I am going to knock the water resistance test out of the park. I'm going to get some really clear results. I'm going to get a banger thumbnail, and then I continued to use electrical tape in a water resistance test. I knew it was going to peel off a little bit, which is why we're trying to do this like harness situation, but I just wasn't expecting to spend my entire last day in Australia under an overcast sky with tape peeling off my back that yielded absolutely zero results. I was really sad. I'm kind of bummed because it feels like I wasted the day. But alas, that was the last day that I could do the test before I headed back to winter in Japan. I was honestly feeling pretty down about the whole thing until about a month later I decided to surprise my friend at her bachelorette party, which gave me the perfect excuse to try the test one more time. A water resistance test done in the lab is the same as a dry test. However, after receiving their initial SPF rating, they then sit in a jacuzzi in 20-minute increments and then do the same UV lamp test again. Now, this is where I saw the main difference between Japanese, Korean, and European sunscreens and Australian sunscreens. In Australia, all water-resistant sunscreens do the same UV lamp test from before, but they get the SPF rating after being submerged in water for 4 hours. In Japan, however, it's a little more complicated because, funnily enough, right now, we are in the middle of transitioning into a new guideline for water resistance. At the moment, before the new regulations come into effect, water resistance claims are not regulated in Japan. Japanese companies, I believe, would usually do their own waterproof testing, which I think was based off the US method, but the JCIA, they wouldn't regulate it, and companies were just free at their discretion to say whether or not their sunscreen was water resistant. I know, I was very shocked also. Now, this doesn't just mean that they're all lying, because personally I think sunscreen companies have a lot of skin in the game, pardon the pun, when it comes to protecting their customers from the sun and skin cancer, but it does make things extremely vague and confusing for the consumers. A lot of sunscreens use terms like waterproof or super waterproof. Some of them have it on the label, but it's not written on the bottle itself. Like it's just a nightmare for customers. So thankfully their new guidelines are much more clear. Under the new guidelines, guidelines. Basically, if you see this label, UV Taisui Se, 1 star, it means that it's water resistant up to 40 minutes, and 2 stars meaning water resistant up to 80 minutes. However, after the water immersion, they only need to retain 50% of the SPF that they had before they went in. This is a standardized testing method by the International Standardization Organization. Holy shit, what a sentence. And it's actually the same guidelines for the EU and for Korea as well. So to compare, Australian sunscreens, 4 hours in the water, needs to retain 100% of the SPF they're going for. Japan, Korea, and the EU, 40 or 80 minutes in the water, only has to retain 50% of the SPF. Very big difference. The only problem is that this new guideline in Japan only came into effect December 2022, and it goes through until November this year, which means that all of the sunscreens I've got for this test, I don't know which method they've used to test the water resistance. I guess we'll just find out. I've started to see a lot of Japanese sunscreens with this new rating now, but all of the sunscreens I've got for the test, except for the Minon sunscreen, doesn't have it on. I'm assuming that on the old method, waterproof means 40 minutes, super waterproof means 80 minutes, but who knows. Also, before this guideline came into effect, there was no regulation for the term sweatproof. I've seen sweatproof on so many things, and there's zero regulation. There's not even a way to test that. So it was just up to the brand's discretion to say what they want to say, I guess. I saw a Korean sunscreen that got released recently, and they've got sandproof as one of their selling points. Sandproof? How did you test that? For my test, I wanted to see how Japanese sunscreens would perform past the 80-minute rating, so I decided to stay in for a total of 100 minutes in 20-minute increments. I'd go in for 20 minutes, I'd come out for 5 to 10 minutes until I'm kind of dry-ish without toweling off, and then I would get back into the water for another 20 minutes. Officially been 1 hour and 40 minutes. It's time to land the sun, and there is some sun, yes! And me, not wanting to have a repeat of last time, decided to really make sure that I was out there for long enough and I would get some solid results. So I stayed out for a total of 3 hours. A decision she would come to regret later. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. That's a lot more than I was expecting, to be honest with you. Holy moly, they all look pretty bad. This is bad. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you have all been DMing me about for the past 3 months, the results. But before I tell you which brands went where, it's really important that you know all of the things that I did wrong with this test that could have possibly skewed the results. First of all, I don't think that the scales I had were accurate at such low weights. I thought that because I bought some fancy new scales, I would be easily able to measure out 0.03 grams, but any tiny little movement or anything wrong with it would cause some kind of imbalance. I tried to get them all to as close as 36 grams as I could to account for any sunscreen left on the wrap, so just to make sure I wasn't under applying anything. I redid so many of the measurements. I would blow on the scale and say a prayer before each one, but I'm still only like 60% sure that I actually did it accurately. Another factor is, as much as my mum tried, all of the squares are different shapes. So I think this mostly just has to do with the fact that the skin on your back, it's moving and flexing and stretching so much. A few other smaller errors I made were that the little containers that I used to transport them to Australia, because I was only using carry-on, they weren't airtight. And one of the sunscreens, the Biore Athleism, there was a bit of oil on the outside of the container. So I think that I should exclude these results, just in case. Also, unfortunately, I found out that the banana boat I used was expired in 2021. I knew I shouldn't have trusted anything from my mum's cabinet, but I did, and sunscreen companies can only guarantee efficacy within a certain time frame, so you're supposed to throw out all of your expired sunscreens, by the way, so I think that I can't include the banana boat result in this, unfortunately. And lastly, some of the sunscreens that I've had them for a while, and I can't guarantee that they've never not been heated over 30 degrees Celsius. Some of these formulas can react or behave differently at higher temperatures, and yeah, that's why we're not supposed to leave sunscreen in the car, apparently. Highly annoying fact to know, by the way. Another thing that I found out after the test is that transporting your sunscreens into different containers might also react with the formula and change the SPF on the label. I messaged Dr. Michelle about it, and she says, 5 days isn't very long, but we obviously can't say for sure that no changes occurred. Add it to the list. It is possible that all of these problems didn't make a difference at all to the results, but it's also very possible that some of the squares got more of a combination of the things that went wrong, and maybe that's why it got a poor result. I'm trying to make sense of it in whatever way I can, because honestly, it's kind of shocking. The photos I took immediately after the test kind of made it difficult to distinguish the differences between them because, unfortunately, I think I overcooked it. It is still possible to see which ones were the top 3, so without further ado, here we go. In number 3, we have La Roche-Posay. I never know if I'm saying that correctly. In number 2, we have Minon Physical Sunscreen. And in the first place of Hannah's most likely flawed test, we have Biore Aqua Rich Watery Essence. Holy sh**. I was not expecting this at all. I guess I wasn't expecting it because it's so lightweight and feels really nice on my skin, so I always just assume like, it's just a face sunscreen. But it did really well. I mean, who knows? These results are probably not very accurate anyway, but amazing. Great job, Biore. I love your work. So I took another photo a day later and it became much more obvious which squares I actually burned in. So this square, this was the control, obviously. The square underneath it, I don't know, I really regret. I heard that like if you layer like vitamin C and then sunscreen, you get some kind of like boost in efficacy. So I was like, what about you get vitamin C on its own? It looks somehow worse than the control. So don't do this. I regret it majorly. So the third worst performing sunscreen, we've got Suncut UV Spray. The second worst performing, we've got Nivea Water Gel, which actually isn't very surprising because it's not claiming to be waterproof and it's also only SPF 35. Note it did perfectly fine on the dry test. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the worst performing result out of all of the sunscreens I tried, the one that really made me question everything and really made me double and triple check all of the problems that I possibly made because I almost didn't believe how bad it was. The worst performing sunscreen by far was Bondi Sands Zinc.
Are you sure about that?
I know. It kind of looks like it's been applied unevenly, but I checked the video and it's been applied the exact same as all of the others. And here are all of the rest of the brands. So for anyone who joined me at this part of the video, just because you don't really want context or nuance, you just want to know like exactly which sunscreen to buy right this second, I'm here to remind you, here are all of the problems that I potentially made that could have possibly skewed the results of this test. So I don't think that you should use these results as a method of figuring out which sunscreen to buy and which one to avoid. I do think that you should go back to at least this timestamp in the video so that you can really learn what it takes to do a test like this properly and how, even though I tried my very best to make it the most scientific thing imaginable, I made so many mistakes. And I swear to God, if I see a screenshot of this on TikTok with no context.
So what did we learn from all of this? So I made this video to answer one simple question. Is the difference between Japanese and Australian sunscreen as big as people make it seem? And based on my dry results, I would say no. I don't think that it really made too big of a difference. But based on the water resistance results, I don't know. Yes? No? It depends because I think that there are so many variables and things that I got wrong, so I'm inclined to just say that the results are inconclusive and that we should just listen to what the experts say. But if we did that, we wouldn't have this video. So which sunscreen should you buy? Well, I've been working on this video for about a year now. Not an exaggeration, that is true. The number one thing that I've learned above all else is that our search for the perfect sunscreen is flawed because there is not one perfect sunscreen that's going to suit every single person, every kind of skin type and tone, and every level of activity. And just choosing the highest SPF available isn't really a good idea either because it might be so thick and uncomfortable that you're not going to use it enough or enough of it. So it's cliche and annoying as hell, but the best sunscreen is the one that you're going to wear. It should be above SPF 30, sturdy enough for your level activity, feel nice on your skin, and at a good enough price point so that when you do use it, you use enough of it. I think over the years, sunscreen has gotten so much better. We've got a huge selection to choose from, but at the same time, every man and his dog is on social media. They're telling us conflicting advice. They're telling us scare tactics and fear-mongering, trying to steer you one way or another. People are sponsored and you can't trust anything, and holy shit, it's exhausting. I think it feels easy to look at a backyard test like this and to almost immediately trust the results because the simplicity of it feels nice on my very, very tired brain that is just looking for anything that will make my decision-making process easier. So actually the reason I decided to make this video was because I saw this photo online and immediately I saw a brand that I liked and used and I was like, oh no, I guess I can't use that brand anymore. That's a shame. without even questioning who did the test, how they did it, what their incentives were. And it wasn't until I went into the comments that I found out that it's actually just stealth marketing and it's completely 100% fake, especially compared to my test results. I didn't get anything that conclusive, but I believed it immediately and I was kind of disappointed in myself. It feels good to simplify things so that regular people like myself can understand them, but at its core, sunscreen is chemistry and it's science and it's complicated and it's confusing, and I think that we've collectively just kind of taken for granted the scientific miracle that sunscreen is. The fact that there's this liquid we can put on our skin and it's invisible, yet it protects us from this glowing orb of death in the sky. That's magic.
It just seems like such a ridiculous idea, and yet it works. To me, it's almost like the cosmetic equivalent of landing on the moon.
Personally, I'm going to continue to use Japanese sunscreen, especially on my face and daily wear, even if I'm in Australia or Japan. But if I'm going to be outside for long hours of the day, I'm going to be doing lots of exercise, sweating, swimming, that kind of thing, then I'll probably be more inclined to use an Australian sunscreen. Not because of my results, but purely just because of the way that water-resistant sunscreen is regulated in Australia versus nearly everywhere else. And after trying about 30 or 40 different sunscreens for this video, here are some of my favorites, rapid fire mode. Okay, I don't have time to talk about all of them, but here are my top 2 favorite Japanese sunscreens. I've got Skin Aqua at the moment. It's got like a slight tint to it, makes me a little bit shimmery, feels nice and lightweight, but it's not water resistant. My top one at the moment is Anessa Perfect Milk. It's water resistant, it's really lightweight, really smooth, silky, but it's also like kind of expensive, which is why it's like a hesitant number 1. And my top 2 Australian sunscreens, La Roche-Posay and Thelios Invisible Fluid. It's very lightweight, very nice, feels like Anessa, but is not water resistant. And then my absolute favorite out of all of these sunscreens is Neutrogena Hydro Boost Water Gel Lotion. Holy shit. It's lightweight, smells good, feels good, it's just perfect, it's beautiful. And then I went back to Australia and I couldn't find it in stores. So then I bought this on iHerb and I realized it's the American version and the ingredients are different. I mean, it still feels pretty good, still feels like a hell of a lot better than the only other American sunscreen I've tried, which was awful. I don't know, if you can get your hands on the Australian version, please do so, because it's amazing, it's perfect, it's perfect. Minon is the best mineral sunscreen I've ever used. It's really lightweight, doesn't leave much of a white cast, but it's just really nice. And also, I've finally tried for the first time some Korean sunscreen. Holy shit. This is good. It's called Beauty of Joseon. It's like a cult favorite. Everyone recommends it online. It's as good as they say. I'd put that up there with Anessa, honestly. And now the worst one, hands down the worst sunscreen I've ever used in my life. No competition. Bonasan Zinc. I'm sorry, I don't mean to like rag on it that much, you know, I don't want to get sued by them, but it's truly awful. It's so thick and heavy and greasy and it leaves the worst white cast I've ever seen, and it bunches up if you get sweaty or anything. On their website it says non-greasy, no white cast. How can you say that? Have you even used it? But anyway, there's a lot of Australian sunscreens that are not here that I left them in Australia. Whatever, it doesn't matter because these 2 are my favorite. These are great. And yeah, and those ones are good, and I don't know, a lot of them are good. Honestly, they're getting really good these days. But click the link in the description. I've made an entire Excel file with all of my favorites listed all the way down to my least favorites. So go check it out. So above all, I hope I've convinced you to never trust a slap some tape and sunscreen on my back and call it a day TikTok test ever again, because quite frankly, we don't have the PhD or the equipment to do it. And lastly, I can't go without saying that the most protected part of my body was the parts under the tape. Who knew the parts of my skin that never even saw the sun were the most protected overall? Here's the thing that I think we don't want to hear, but that is that the reason that Japanese women are so beautiful and they look young all the time, it's because they're covered head to toe in the middle of summer. That is real skincare, but I don't think, personally, I don't think that Australians are ready for that level of commitment yet. So until then, we all just need to, say it with me now, slip, slop, slop.
Slip on a shirt, slop on sunscreen and slap on a hat.
Thank you so much for watching this video. It's by far the longest and hardest video I have ever made ever, and there's still so many things that I didn't even touch on. Any sunscreen questions that you have that I didn't answer, Dr. Michelle on Lab Buff and Beauty Science YouTube channel, she's almost definitely answered it for you. So please go to her channel, like and subscribe, go buy her skincare book, and send her some love, because Lord knows she probably needs it from all of the debunking of misinformation that she does. What an absolute hero. If this is the first video of mine that you're seeing, welcome to my channel. I usually make videos about my travels here, interesting deep dives and stories based loosely around Japan. My most favorite video I've ever made is a deep dive on Japanese train fans. The train fan community is strong and very passionate, and I love this video, so if that sounds interesting, go and check that out. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and wear your sunscreen. Thanks for watching. Bye.